No ship appeared on the scanners. No hyperspace signature registered. Yet something fell from the void between stars, leaving only questions and the echo of impossible technology in its wake. On Alderaan, in the quiet marble halls of the Organa estate, the stars did not fall, a man in white did, standing where no one had stood a heartbeat before, as though he had simply always been there in reality, was only now catching up to the fact. Bail Organa was not easily startled. Years in the Senate had trained the surprise out of him, replaced it with a diplomat's practiced stillness. But nothing in his experience, not Palpatine's growing shadow, not the endless grinding horror of the Clone Wars, not even the strange half-rumors that trickled out of the Jedi Temple, had prepared him for a being who arrived without a door, a ship, or an explanation, and who looked at him the way a man might look at an ant he found mildly amusing. Bail Organa, the stranger said, and there was something wrong about the way he said it, too familiar, too knowing, as if he'd read the senator's whole life in a file and found it only moderately interesting. I've been looking forward to this conversation for longer than you'd believe. My name is Q, and before you reach for that comm panel, I should tell you it won't work. Nothing in this room will work until I permit it. Consider it a professional courtesy. I'd rather we talk than have you embarrass yourself. Bail's hand, halfway to the panel on his desk, stopped. He straightened instead, falling back on the only weapon he had. His voice, level and unhurried. The same one he'd used on trade blockades and separatist provocateurs alike. Then talk. Who are you? And why are you in my home? Two excellent questions, and I'm going to answer both. Though you won't like either. Answer as much as you'd like. Q began to walk the length of the room, trailing one hand, along a shelf of Alderaanian crystal as though inspecting a museum he found underwhelming. What I am doesn't have a tidy word in your language. Call me a caretaker of consequences, if it helps. Why I'm here is simpler. I'm here because your galaxy is about to make a catastrophic mistake. And for reasons that are frankly none of your business, I've decided to stop it. Or rather, I've decided to help someone else stop it. The Force and I don't often agree on methods. We agree on this. The word landed strangely in the room. The Force, spoken not with a Jedi's reverence, but with the casual authority of someone who considered it a colleague rather than a mystery. Bail felt the floor of his certainty shift half a degree. The Force, he repeated carefully. You're telling me you speak for the Force. I'm telling you the Force. And I have entered into what your species might call a joint venture. Q stopped walking and turned to face him fully. And for the first time something in his expression sharpened, the amusement thinning into something closer to intent. Sit down, Senator. What I'm about to tell, you will take a great many names you don't yet recognize and turn them into people who will haunt you for the rest of your life. I'd rather you were sitting when it happens. Bill did not sit. It was, in its small way, the first act of defiance in a war he didn't yet know he'd already joined. I've stood through worse than words, whoever you are. Something that might have been respect flickered across Q's face, gone as quickly as it came. Have it your way. Let's begin, then, with a boy from a desert world called Tatooine. A slave, born to a woman named Shmi, with more raw power in him than the Jedi Order had seen in 1,000 generations. His name is Anakin Skywalker. In roughly 19 years from this moment, he will kneel in a chamber not unlike this one and take a new name, Darth Vader, and the galaxy will spend the rest of its existence paying for the mistakes that took him there, mistakes made by Jedi who should have known better, a Senate that looked away, and a Chancellor who orchestrated every single step of it from the shadows. For longer than you've been alive, the name meant nothing to Bail yet. That, he understood even as Q said it, was about to change. There was a weight gathering behind the stranger's words, the sense of a dam about to give way. Decades of consequence compressed into a conversation he had not asked for and could not now refuse. I'd like to know why, Bail said. A being like you cares what happens to one boy from Tatooine. I don't, Q said simply. I care what happens to trillions of beings across a galaxy that's about to be handed, gift-wrapped, to a Sith Lord who's been playing every side of your war since before your daughter was born. He paused, and the casual cruelty in his voice gave way, just briefly, to something almost sober. Your daughter, Senator. We'll get to her. We'll get to a great many things you don't have names for yet. A republic that's already dead and doesn't know it. An army built with a leash sewn into its skull, and a moon-sized weapon with your planet's name already carved somewhere on its targeting logs. I told you to sit down. This time, slowly, Bail Organa did. Above Alderaan's atmosphere, though neither man yet knew it. The sky had already begun, impossibly, to change. If you want to see more characters enter the Star Wars galaxy, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. May the Force be with you. The room had changed since Q's arrival, though nothing in it had physically moved. Bail Organa sat with his hands folded on his desk, a posture he used in the Senate when he needed to project calm he didn't feel, and watched the being who called himself Q settle into the chair across from him with the loose, theatrical ease of someone who had rehearsed this 1,000 times in 1,000 other rooms. Anakin Skywalker, Q said again, letting the name breathe in the space between them. Let's build him properly, since you'll need to understand the whole of him before you understand what he becomes. Born a slave on Tatooine to a woman named Shmi, no father, not in any way your biology would recognize. The Jedi found him at 9 years old and argued for 2 days about whether he was too old, too attached, too dangerous to train. They were right about all 3 and trained him anyway. Too dangerous, Bail repeated. You said he'd have more power than the Order had seen in 1,000 generations. I did, and he did. The prophecy. And yes, your Jedi have prophecies. For all their claims of rational detachment, called him the Chosen One, meant to bring balance to the Force. Q's mouth curved, not quite a smile. They took that to mean he'd fix everything. Balance is a crueler word than that. It doesn't promise which side wins. Bail had spent a career learning to read subtext in diplomatic language, and he heard it now, the shape of tragedy folded into every sentence Q spoke, waiting to unfold. You said his mother's name was Shmi. Past tense, when you said it before. You're quicker than most of the beings I've had this conversation with. Yes, past tense. Q's voice did not soften. Exactly, but something in it settled, like a man choosing his next words with unaccustomed care. The Jedi left her behind when they took her son, freed him, not her. Slavery didn't concern the Order the way it should have. Years later, she was taken by Tusken Raiders and died in her son's arms after a month of torture. And Anakin Skywalker, 19 years old, trained since childhood to master his emotions and never once taught how to survive genuine grief. Killed every single one of them. Men, women, children, an entire camp, and told no one but a woman named Padme Amidala, who loved him anyway. Bail felt something cold settle in his chest. The Jedi didn't know. The Jedi didn't ask. That's rather the theme of this story. Senator, a religious Order so certain of its own wisdom about attachment that it never noticed the boy in its care was drowning in exactly the emotions it forbade him to feel. Q rose from his chair and began to pace again. And Bail understood now that it was not theater. It was the closest thing to genuine anger the being seemed to permit himself. Padme Amidala, former queen of Naboo, later senator, your colleague, in fact, though you don't yet know her as well as you will. She married Anakin Skywalker in secret when he was still a Padawan, against every rule his order held sacred, because the Jedi Code forbids attachment as a path to the dark side. A blunt rule, built on a true fear, aimed entirely at the wrong target. You're saying the Jedi were wrong about attachment. I'm saying the Jedi mistook the disease for the cure. Q stopped, pacing and looked at him directly. And there was no mockery in it now. Love was never Anakin Skywalker's weakness. The secrecy was. A boy taught from childhood that his deepest bond was shameful, forbidden, something to hide from the people meant to guide him. Of course, he turned to the one man who offered him honesty about his feelings instead of denial. It only mattered that the man was a Sith Lord grooming him from the age of 14. The name hung unspoken between them for a moment before Q gave it to him. Chancellor Sheev Palpatine. Your Chancellor, Senator, the man you've served beside, argued policy with, perhaps even trusted. He is also Darth Sidious, the last of an unbroken line of Sith Lords who have been patiently constructing this war. This entire war, the one currently burning through 1,000 systems, as an elaborate stage for his own ascension. Every battle, every separatist advance, every Republic victory that costs too much, He orchestrated all of it, on both sides, simultaneously, for longer than you have held office. Bale's diplomatic composure, carefully rebuilt over the last several minutes, cracked audibly in his exhale. That's not possible. The Separatists are led by Count Dooku, a former Jedi. Also a Sith, Dooku answers to Sidious as Darth Tyrannus, and has since before the war began. He was recruited, in turn, after the death of a Jedi named Kagan Jinn, killed by Sidious's first apprentice, a Zabrak assassin named Darth Maul, on Naboo. During the very blockade crisis that first put young Senator Amidala in your Senate's chamber, Maul nearly died that day too, cut in half by Qui-Gon's Padawan, a man named Obi-Wan Kenobi, who went on to train Anakin Skywalker himself, and who loves him now the way in. Older brother loves a younger, one he cannot save. And Maul survived. Obsessively, impossibly survived, and is currently carving out a criminal empire on Mandalore under a duchess named Satine Kryze. A pacifist ruler he will eventually murder in front of Obi-Wan Kenobi simply to watch what it does to him. Hugh's voice had gone flat, reciting now rather than performing, the way a man might read a casualty list. Satine loved Kenobi too, incidentally. Another Jedi who chose the code over the person. You may be noticing a pattern. Bail Organa sat very still. Why are you telling me all of this? Names, deaths, secrets. You could have started with what you actually want from me. Hugh smiled, and for the first time it reached something genuine in his eyes. Because in about 11 minutes, Senator, the sky above your capital is going to fill with warships that do not belong to this galaxy, crewed by people who should not exist, carrying 2 children who are, in every way that matters, already yours. And you are going to need to understand exactly what you're standing against before you meet the man who spent 19 years building the weapon meant to end it all. 11 minutes, Bale said, testing the phrase as though it might reveal itself as a bluff. You're very precise for someone who claims not to be bound by time. I'm not bound by it. I simply enjoy it. Hugh resumed his seat, folding one leg over the other with theatrical patience, though Bale noticed, barely, that his gaze kept flicking toward the window, toward the darkening Alderaanian sky, as if even Q found himself anticipating what came next. But we have unfinished business first. You asked why I'm telling you all this instead of simply telling you what I want. The answer is that you cannot possibly understand what's coming aboard those ships without understanding the trap this war was built to be. Then finish it, Bale said. Sidious orchestrated a war between his own puppet armies. To what end? To the only end that's ever mattered to men like him. Absolute power, absolute control, and the complete unmaking of the only institution capable of stopping him. Hugh's tone sharpened, gathering momentum. It began, publicly, with the Trade Federation, a corporate conglomerate Sidious manipulated into blockading Naboo over trade taxation he himself proposed. A pretext, a stage. It let a queen named Padme Amidala call a vote of no confidence against the sitting chancellor, and it put Sheev Palpatine, grieving, sympathetic, conveniently from Naboo himself, into the office he'd spent decades maneuvering toward. Everything since has been an extension of that same architecture. Manufacture the crisis. Offer yourself as the solution. Consolidate what the crisis leaves behind. Bale's jaw tightened. He had voted, 3 years ago, to grant Palpatine emergency powers to prosecute the war. He had told himself it was temporary. The Clone Wars themselves are the largest expression of the same trick. Hugh continued. 10 years before the war began, Sidious commissioned an army in secret, using a dead Jedi Master's identity to authorize it, using a bounty hunter named Jango Fett as genetic template, grown on a world called Kamino by scientists who never asked why a covert army needed to exist before anyone knew a war was coming. 2 million clone troopers, loyal, disciplined, and grown with something else buried in them that no Jedi general ever thought to look for. The inhibitor chips, Bale said. He'd heard the phrase now 3 times without understanding it. Biochips, implanted in every clone's brain during gestation. Ostensibly a behavioral safeguard against psychological instability from accelerated growth. In truth, a contingency order. Order 66. That overrides every clone trooper's loyalty, obedience, even affection for the Jedi generals who lead them, and replaces it in an instant with a single directive: kill them. All of them. Simultaneously, across every front of this war. The moment Palpatine gives the command, the room had gone very quiet. Bail Organa had spent the war watching clone troopers fight and bleed and die beside Jedi generals who spoke of them, when they spoke of them at all, with genuine, if paternalistic affection. The clones don't know. The clones don't know. They believe themselves loyal soldiers of the Republic, and in every way that matters. They are brave, capable, decent men who deserve far better than what's been done to the inside of their own skulls. For the first time, something like real anger crossed Q's face, quick and cold. That is, incidentally, one of the crueler ironies of this entire war. Sidious didn't need to corrupt the clones. He needed only to leash them, and let their genuine loyalty do the rest when the leash finally pulled taut. And Dooku, Maul, what role do they play in this, if Sidious controls everything? Instruments. Dooku believes himself an idealist, correcting a corrupt Republic from outside its rotted institutions, and doesn't yet know his usefulness has an expiration date the moment a better weapon presents itself. Maul survived his defeat on Naboo through sheer furious will, rebuilt himself with cybernetic legs, and has spent years since building a criminal empire, the Shadow Collective, that will eventually seize control of Mandalore itself, using Duchess Satine cries as a hostage to break Obi-Wan Kenobi's spirit before killing her in front of him. Neither of them understands they're playing pieces on Sidious's board. Neither will survive discovering it. Bail exhaled slowly, the diplomat in him already trying, uselessly, to find some angle of negotiation in a war that had apparently never been winnable. Through any means he understood. You said this ends with a weapon. A moon-sized weapon, with my planet's name on its targeting logs. The Death Star. Hugh let the name sit, heavy and final. A battle station the size of a small moon, capable of destroying an entire planet in a single shot. Sidious has been quietly diverting Separatist and Republic resources alike into its construction for years, through corporate shell after corporate shell, using this war as cover for the greatest act of military theft in galactic history. When it's finished, and it will be finished, Senator, roughly 18 years from tonight, if nothing changes, it exists for exactly one purpose: to make the destruction of a planet a footnote, a demonstration. And your world, Alderaan, sits rather high on the list of demonstrations Sidious will consider making. Bail's hands, folded on the desk, had gone white-knuckled without his noticing. You said, if nothing changes. You're here to change it. I'm here, Hugh said, and rose to his feet as the first tremor of something vast moved through the air outside the window, because the Force asked a favor of an old acquaintance, and because I find myself, against every instinct I possess, rather curious what happens when a galaxy, full of people who already know how their story ends, gets a chance to write a different one. Look outside, Senator Organa. I believe your sky is about to become considerably more crowded. Beyond the window, the clear, Alderaanian night had begun to fracture, not with the violence of an attack, but with the slow, impossible bloom of starlight where no stars had been a moment before. Dozens of points of brilliance resolving, second by second, into shapes no telescope in this galaxy had ever charted. There was no hyperspace flash, no telltale streak of blue-white distortion collapsing into real space the way Alderaanian sensor operators had been trained to recognize 1,000 times over. There was only absence, and then presence, a fleet of warships simply arriving, all at once, filling the high orbital lanes above Alderaan as though they had always been there and the universe had merely forgotten to render them until now. 12 ships. Their hulls bore no insignia the Republic's threat catalogs would recognize. Sleek saucer and nacelle silhouettes, running lights blinking in unfamiliar rhythms, hull plating that gleamed under starlight with a metallic sheen unlike Durasteel or Transparasteel or anything Kaminoan shipwrights had ever conceived. At the formation's heart hung a vessel larger than the rest, its hull marked in stark characters, USS Melbourne, NCC 62043. Alderaanian orbital defense screamed to life. comm channels flooded with demands for identification that went unanswered, because the officers meant to answer them did not yet know they had arrived somewhere at all. Aboard the Melbourne's bridge, the change happened without violence, without so much as a flicker of the lights. One moment the ships, Starfleet officers sat calmly, monitoring routine long-range sensor sweeps at the edge of Federation space, and the next, every station held someone new, someone who had not existed on that bridge a heartbeat before, and who now blinked in the sudden weight of unfamiliar gravity, as though waking from a very long sleep into a body that fit perfectly and a situation that fit nothing at all. Captain Data rose from the command chair with the same measured precision that governed every motion he made, gold-toned eyes taking in the bridge's readouts in a fraction of a second. Most humanoid minds would have needed a full minute to process. "Report," he said in the calm, faintly formal cadence that had never once, in his memory, failed to steady a bridge crew's nerves. "Sensors show a single planet. Class M, dead ahead, designation unknown to our databases." The voice belonged to Commander Monroe, first officer, a broad-shouldered woman whose hand had already found the tactical display. Without conscious instruction, old reflex reasserting itself, before her mind had finished catching up to her circumstances. "Captain, this isn't the Wolf 359 system. This isn't anywhere in the astrometric charts. I don't recognize a single stellar reference point." At the helm, Lieutenant Commander Cito Jax's hands moved across controls that felt achingly familiar and were, upon closer inspection, subtly wrong, configured for a starship whose systems didn't quite match Starfleet's standard, as though built from the same principles by different hands. "Confirmed, Commander. Whatever brought us here brought the entire fleet with us. I'm reading 11 other hull signatures in formation, all matching our last known engagement roster." She looked up, dark eyes finding Data's. "Sir, this is the Wolf 359 fleet." The silence that followed carried a weight none of the ship's automated systems could measure. Every soul on that bridge, and Data now confirmed through a rapid subspace frequency sweep that returned nothing but static where subspace itself should have been. Every soul across all 12 ships understood, in the same instant, what that name meant. Wolf 359 was not a system they had sailed proudly into. It was a slaughter their service records remembered as unsurvivable. A battle where an entire fleet had been reduced to wreckage and 39 ships lost in minutes to a single Borg cube. And yet here they stood, ships whole, weapons armed, warp cores humming steady beneath their feet, alive, in a place that did not exist on any chart Starfleet had ever drawn. "Captain," Monroe said carefully, "where are our crews?" It was, Data reflected, the only question that mattered, and the one with no immediately satisfying answer. He had performed a full internal scan of the Melbourne in the seconds since. His own awareness cohered on this bridge, and the results were unambiguous. Every station across all 12 vessels was crewed, fully staffed by capable officers, and not one of them was the crew who had served aboard these ships when last. Data's positronic memory recorded a coherent timeline. New people, familiar duties. No transition he could locate in his own logs. "Unknown," Data said. "However, I would direct the bridge's attention to a more immediate matter." He gestured to the primary view screen, where the planet below turned serene and blue-green beneath its ring of high orbital defense platforms now hailing the fleet with escalating urgency across every open frequency the Melbourne's sensors could parse. "We are being addressed by a planetary defense network, in a language our universal translator is processing for the first time. I recommend we respond before whoever commands those platforms elects to fire first and inquire second." Cito's hands were already moving. "Patching audio through now, sir." The voice that came through was tense, formal, urgently controlled, a woman's voice. An officer of Alderaan's small but disciplined defense force, demanding identification, intention, and immediate withdrawal from restricted orbital space in the same breath. Data considered his answer for exactly as long as it took a positronic brain to weigh diplomacy against honesty and find them, for once, entirely compatible. "This is Captain Data of the Federation starship Melbourne, representing a fleet of 12 Vessels. We do not know how we arrived in this system, and we mean your world no harm. We would request contact with your planetary leadership at the earliest possible convenience. I believe we may share information of considerable mutual importance. Below, in a room where a being who called himself Q had just finished bracing a senator for exactly this moment. A comm panel that had refused to function for the better part of an hour chimed softly back to life. Q smiled, unhurried, entirely unsurprised. Ah, he said, right on schedule. Bail Organa crossed to the comm panel with the deliberate calm of a man who had spent his career projecting composure he did not feel, though this time the effort cost him more than diplomacy usually did. Q had not moved from his chair, watching with the faint, proprietary amusement of a man observing a play whose ending he already knew. "This is Senator Bail Organa," he said, keying the channel open. "I understand you're requesting contact with Alderaanian leadership. You have it. State your intentions clearly, Captain, and be aware that our orbital defenses remain at full readiness." "Understood, Senator, and reasonable." Data's voice carried none of the tension Bale might have expected from a fleet commander suddenly appearing, unexplained, over a foreign world's capital. "I will be direct. Our fleet does not know how we arrived in this system. We have no hostile intention toward Alderaan or its people. I would request the opportunity to meet with you and your government in person, so that we might explain what we do know, and so that you might explain to us precisely where, and, I suspect, when, we have arrived." Bale glanced at Q, who spread his hands in a gesture of innocent helpfulness that fooled no one. "Oh, don't look at me. I only arranged the invitation. The rest of this conversation is entirely your own to have." "Permission granted for a single shuttle, Captain," Bale said into the comm, "on the condition that it carries no weapons, and no more than a handful of your people. I trust you understand the position you've put me in." "I do, Senator. And I would add, we are transporting several individuals who will require considerable context before this conversation can proceed usefully. I ask your patience in advance." The channel closed. Bale turned to find Q already risen from his chair, straightening his sleeve with theatrical unconcern, as though the fate of a galaxy weren't currently converging on one landing pad outside the senator's window. "Context," Bale repeated. "You said 2 children. You said they were, in your words, already mine." "I did say that." For once, something in Q's expression softened into what might, on a more human face, have been called gentleness. "You'll understand shortly. Come, Senator, I believe it's time you met your daughter." The shuttle that descended through Alderaan's atmosphere bore no resemblance to any Republic or Separatist craft Bale had ever seen. Squat, saucer-winged, its hull the same unfamiliar alloy as the ship's still holding position above the planet. It settled onto the palace landing pad with a whine of engines unlike anything in his experience, and its hatch hissed open onto a ramp that lowered with mechanical precision. Captain Data descended first, golden-eyed, pale-skinned in a way that read, on closer inspection, as entirely artificial rather than merely unusual. He moved with a composed economy that immediately struck Bale as more disciplined than most organic officers he'd served beside. Behind him came Commander Monroe, hand resting near a sidearm she made no move to draw, and Lieutenant Commander Cito Jaxa, dark-eyed and watchful, scanning the palace grounds with the reflexive thoroughness of a trained tactical officer cataloging every possible threat. And behind them, Bale felt the air leave his lungs before his mind caught up to why. Came 2 more figures who did not wear Starfleet uniforms at all. A young man, fair-haired, dressed in simple travel clothes, with a lightsaber hilt visible at his belt, and eyes that held a weariness no one his apparent age should carry. Beside him, a young woman with dark hair pinned back in a style Bill did not recognize, but somehow, impossibly, felt he should, poised, sharp-eyed, radiating the particular composure of someone who had led people through worse than this and come out the other side still standing. Q, walking a half-step behind Bale, leaned close enough to murmur without being overheard. "Senator Organa, allow me the pleasure. Luke Skywalker, and Leia, though I suspect, in a few years, you were planning to give her a different surname than the one she was born with." Bale's breath caught entirely. The young woman's eyes found his across the landing pad, and something in her expression, recognition, grief, a fierce and complicated love, told him, before a single word was spoken, that Q had not been exaggerating a single syllable of what was coming. Senator Organa, she said, and her voice cracked, just slightly, on the second word. You don't know me yet, but I've spent my whole life knowing you as my father. Behind her, Data stepped forward with the careful diplomacy of an officer who understood precisely how much weight this meeting carried, and addressed the stunned senator with the same measured calm he'd used from the bridge of the Melbourne. Senator Organa, I believe introductions are in order, and I suspect a great many of them will be difficult. I would ask that you prepare yourself. What we have to explain will reshape a considerable portion of what you believe you understand about the war currently consuming this galaxy. Bail Organa, who had absorbed more impossible truths in the last hour than in the whole of his political career, found himself looking past Data, past Monroe and Cedo, past even Luke's tired eyes, to Leia's face, searching it for some trace of the daughter he had not yet, in this telling of events, ever held. Then you'd better start, he said quietly, at the beginning. Whatever that means, now. Q's smile, from a few steps behind them all, was the smile of a man who had been waiting a very long time for exactly this moment to arrive. The war room beneath the Alderaan Palace had never hosted a briefing quite like this one. Holographic displays that normally tracked separatist fleet movements now hung dark and unused, pushed to the periphery, while at the room's center stood Data, Bail Organa, and a growing collection of Alderaanian officers who had abandoned all pretense of composure. Roughly 10 minutes into the conversation, "You're telling me," said General Ferris Rell, commander of Alderaan's modest defense force, "that the clone army fighting alongside Republic forces across this entire war is carrying a kill switch in their heads, waiting for a single order." "I am telling you precisely that," Data confirmed. "And I would add that we possess, aboard the Melbourne, the means to remove it. Not merely theorize about it, remove it. Federation medical technology, adapted with input from Lieutenant Commander Cedo's engineering background and my own analysis of the biochip structure, is capable of extracting the inhibitor chip from a clone trooper's brain stem with minimal risk, provided the procedure is performed before activation." Bale leaned forward. "You have clones aboard your ships already." "We do." It was Monroe who answered, arms crossed, her tactical assessment of the room's mood clearly favoring blunt honesty over diplomatic softening. When the fleet arrived, roughly 600 clone troopers were already stationed aboard our vessels, embedded, it seems, the same way our own crew complement was replaced. They didn't choose to be there any more than we did, and near as we can tell, not one of them has had the chip removed yet. A silence settled over the room, heavy with implication. 600 men, loyal, capable, entirely unaware that a single transmitted order could turn every one of them into an instrument of slaughter against the very people they served beside. "Then it should be the first thing we do," Bale said. "Before anything else. Before negotiations. Before explanations to the wider Senate. Before anything. If there is even a possibility that order could be given, there is considerably more than a possibility," Hugh said from the doorway, where he'd been leaning with characteristic patience, watching the proceedings with the air of a man auditing a play he'd already seen performed badly 1,000 times. "Consider it a certainty on the original timeline. Order 66 was given. Every Jedi general serving alongside clone troopers across this galaxy was executed by the men who'd fought beside them for years. In the same hour, on nearly every front of this war simultaneously. It is, without exaggeration, the single most efficient act of premeditated betrayal your galaxy has ever produced." The room absorbed this in silence broken only by the soft hum of dormant holo displays. "Then we start now?" Bale said, and for the first time since Q's arrival, something in his voice carried the hard clarity of a man who had found, in the wreckage of everything he thought he knew, a single action he could actually take. The procedure bay aboard the Melbourne had been reconfigured within the hour. Sickbay equipment repurposed under Cedo's supervision, working alongside a Federation-trained medical officer whose name, like so many others, had simply arrived with her when the ship's crew changed. The first clone trooper to sit in the chair introduced himself with the easy informality. Clone troopers were known for among the Jedi, generals who respected them, as CT 4587. Everyone aboard called him Whistle. Not gonna lie, sir, Whistle said to Data, who stood monitoring the procedure with quiet attentiveness. This is a strange way to start a shift. I would agree, Data said. I would also add that what we are about to remove from your neural pathways is, by every metric available to me, a device installed without your knowledge or consent, designed specifically to override every choice you have ever made about loyalty, morality, and survival. I do not consider this an unusual procedure. I consider it a correction of a grave injustice. Whistle's easy humor faded into something more solemn. You're saying somebody put something in my head. On purpose. To make me. What exactly? To make you kill the Jedi generals you currently serve beside, Ceto said, not softening it. Her hands already moving across the surgical console with practiced precision. Without hesitation. Without memory of choosing to. The moment the order's given. The bay went quiet except for the soft chime of medical scanners. Whistle's jaw tightened, and something in his expression, the particular fury of a soldier, realizing his own body had been weaponized, without his knowledge, hardened into resolve. Then get it out. The procedure took 11 minutes. When it was finished, Whistle sat up slowly, testing the motion of his own thoughts as though checking for a wrongness that had, until an hour ago, been invisible even to himself. Feels the same, he said, uncertain. Should it feel different? It may not, immediately, Data said. But somewhere in the choices you make from this day forward, you will be entirely your own. That is the difference, even if it is not one you can feel directly. By the time the sun set over Alderaan's capital, 400 more clone troopers had gone through the same chair. The same 11 minutes. The same quiet, furious relief. Word spread through the ranks faster than any official announcement could have managed, passed trooper to trooper in the corridors and mess halls of a fleet that no longer entirely belonged to the galaxy. It had been dropped into, but belonged, increasingly, to itself. Whistle found Data on the Melbourne's bridge that evening, watching Alderaan turn slowly beneath them. Captain, he said, for whatever it's worth, thank you. Whoever did this to us, you just made liars out of them. Data considered this for a long moment before answering, gold eyes reflecting the planet's soft blue light. You are welcome, trooper. Though I would suggest the gratitude belongs equally to yourself for choosing, freely, to remain. Leia Organa had faced down Imperial interrogators, watched her home planet burn from the deck of a Star Destroyer, buried a brother and a husband and a mother she'd only just found. She had lived, by any measure, an entire lifetime of grief before she'd ever been born into this one. None of it had prepared her for the strange, vertiginous grief of standing in the palace gardens of Alderaan, alive, whole, 19 years old by the measure of this body, and utterly unable to explain to the man who would one day be her father why she already loved him. I don't understand, Bale said quietly, standing across from her beneath the flowering vines that lined the palace's eastern terrace, the same terrace. Leia realized with an ache she hadn't braced for, where she'd sat as a girl and been taught to read Alderaanian treaties by a mother who wasn't yet her mother in this telling of events. Hugh said you were my daughter. But I don't have a daughter. Breha and I, we've spoken of adoption, quietly, but nothing has ever. You will, Leia said. Soon. After. She stopped herself, throat tight. How did one explain a future built on a mother's death and childbirth? A father's fall to darkness. A war that hadn't happened yet, but lived in her. Memory as vividly as anything that had. After things happen that I don't think I should tell you yet. Not all at once. You have enough to carry tonight. Bale studied her. This stranger who spoke of him with a daughter's ease. Who carried herself with a diplomat's poise that felt, disconcertingly, like looking into a mirror aimed forward through time. Hugh told me your mother's name. Padme Amidala. Something in Leia's composure cracked. Just slightly, the way it had. Cracked once before in front of a man in Cloud City, who'd claimed to be her brother's father and nothing to her at all. She's alive, Leia said. Right now, somewhere in this galaxy. My mother is alive, and she doesn't know me. And I don't know if I'm strong enough to meet her and pretend. I don't already know how she. She stopped again, harder this time, and looked away toward the mountains. Bill did not press. Whatever else the last several hours had taught him, he had learned enough to recognize a wound too raw to touch directly. Then we won't speak of it until you're ready, he said instead, gently. Whatever else is true, Leia, I believe you when you say I would come to love you as my own. I find I already do, somehow, though I couldn't tell you why. Across the garden, near a reflecting pool that mirrored Alderaan's twin moons, Luke Skywalker stood alone and carried a different weight entirely. He had spent a lifetime, 2 lifetimes, if he counted the strange doubled, memory now living behind his eyes, searching for a father worth the name. He had found him too late the first time, in a mask and a black suit of armor, in the final minutes before redemption cost everything. Now he stood on a garden path where, somewhere across the galaxy, that same man walked, and breathed and had not yet built, the mask that would define him. And Luke understood, with a clarity that frightened him, that he could not simply walk up to Anakin Skywalker and call him father. Not yet. Maybe not for a long, long time. You're not eating, came a voice beside him, Ahsoka Tano, arms crossed, watching him with the particular perceptiveness of someone who'd spent years learning to read Skywalker silences. I keep thinking about what I'd say to him, Luke admitted. If I saw him right now, before Order 66, before Mustafar, before any of it, his hands, resting on the reflecting pool's stone edge, tightened involuntarily. I forgave him once at the very end, when there was almost nothing left of him to forgive. I don't know if I can look at the version of him that still has everything to lose and not just beg him not to lose it. Ahsoka's expression, for a moment, carried the weight of her own unfinished grief, a master she'd loved and left, and would lose again, and might now, and possibly, have a chance to save. I don't have an answer for you, Luke. I've been asking myself the same question since I woke up in a body I thought I'd never wear again. All I know is that we don't get to save him by loving the man he becomes. We only get a chance to love the boy he still is, right now, before any of it happens, and hope that's enough to change what comes next. Luke looked at her, and something in her certainty steadied him more than he expected. You really think it can work? Changing all of it? I think, Ahsoka said slowly, that the Force doesn't usually hand out second chances this large without expecting something done with them. She glanced skyward, toward the fleet still holding silent orbit above the capital, toward a war that hadn't yet claimed the lives it once had. And I think you didn't. Dragged 2 dead men's crews and a graveyard of Jedi back into the light just to watch us waste it feeling sorry for ourselves. Behind them, unnoticed, Bail Organa watched his future daughter compose herself beside a reflecting pool that had not yet seen the grief she carried, and understood, with the growing certainty of a man who trusted his instincts even when the facts defied him, that whatever came next, Alderaan, and he, would not face it unchanged. Ahsoka Tano found her the second night, standing alone on the Melbourne's observation deck, watching Alderaan's slow rotation beneath a silence that felt, to anyone who knew her, entirely unlike her. You've been avoiding the strategy sessions, Ahsoka said, not unkindly, coming to stand beside her at the viewport. I've been thinking, Leia answered, about how many ways this could still go wrong. It wasn't Leia she'd come to find, though. Ahsoka let the silence hold a moment, longer before she said what she'd actually walked in to say. I keep thinking about Anakin too. Different reasons than yours, probably. You're mourning a father you haven't met yet. I'm trying to figure out if I have the right to walk back into his life at all. After I walked out of it, Leia turned, surprised by the admission. You left the Order because of him. Because of what the Council let happen to you. I left because the Council chose its own comfort over trusting me. And Anakin was the only one who fought for me when it mattered. And then I still walked away from him. Because I couldn't stay inside an institution that had already shown me what it was willing to sacrifice. Ahsoka's Montrals caught the starlight, and for a moment the centuries-old weight of that choice sat plainly on her face. I've asked myself for years whether staying might have changed anything, whether he needed one more person who believed in him without conditions, and I wasn't there to be it. You can't blame yourself for a war Palpatine built brick by brick for decades. No, Ahsoka agreed. But I can ask myself what I owe him now, knowing everything I know, with a chance most people never get. She turned from the viewport to face Leia directly. That's actually why I came to find you. Not to talk about Anakin. To ask what you think we should do about him. The question landed harder than Leia expected. She'd spent 2 days folding her grief for her father into something private, unshared, too raw to weaponize into strategy. Ahsoka was asking her to do exactly that. I've thought about walking up to him, Leia admitted slowly. Telling him everything. Skipping straight to the end so he never has to walk the path that gets him there. Some nights I think that's mercy. Other nights I think it's exactly the kind of manipulation that got him killed the first time. Someone deciding they know better. Then he does what he needs to hear and when. That's the trap, isn't it? Ahsoka said. Everyone in his life has always decided things for him. The council decided he was too old, then trained him anyway. Palpatine decided he was a weapon and armed him. Even the people who loved him best, Padme, Obi-Wan, decided again and again that protecting him meant managing what he was allowed to know. She shook her head slowly. If we walk up to him now and dump the whole truth on him without his consent, we're not saving him. We're just becoming the latest people who decided for him instead of with him. Leia considered this, turning it over with the same careful analysis she'd once applied to rebellion strategy sessions, when the stakes had been battle plans instead of a single man's soul. So what do we do instead? We give him choices instead of certainties, Ahsoka said. We tell him the truth when he's ready to hear it, not before. Not because it's convenient for us to unburden ourselves of it faster. We show him, through what we do here, that attachment doesn't have to be the thing that destroys him. That he can love people openly, without hiding it, without a council ready to expel him for it. And the sky doesn't have to fall because of it. She looked out at Alderaan again, and something steadier settled into her voice. The Jedi's mistake wasn't that they feared the dark side. It's that they built an entire philosophy around denying half of what makes a person whole, and called the denial wisdom. If we're going to give Anakin Skywalker a real second chance, it has to start with not repeating that mistake ourselves. Leia was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice had lost some of its careful restraint. You really believe he can still choose differently, even knowing everything he still has ahead of him? Losing his mother, the war, Palpatine's manipulation, all of it. I believe, Ahsoka said, that the boy I knew before any of that happened to him had more capacity for love than almost anyone I've ever served beside. That's not a flaw the galaxy needs to correct out of him. It's the exact thing worth protecting. She met Leia's eyes, steady and certain in a way that reminded Leia, achingly, of a different conversation with a different Jedi, years and lifetimes from now. We're not here to save Darth Vader, Leia. We're here to make sure Anakin Skywalker never has to become him in the first place. Those are very different missions, and I intend to fight for the second one with everything I have left. Above them, through the viewport, Alderaan turned on, unaware that its fate, and the fate of a boy from Tatooine neither woman had yet dared to approach, hung now on the quiet resolve of two people who had already lost him once, and refused, entirely, to lose him again. The summons came from Q, 3 days after the fleet's arrival, delivered not through any comm channel, but through his sudden, characteristic appearance in the middle of Bail Organa's war room, interrupting a briefing on Republic Senate reaction to the unidentified fleet, now openly holding position above Alderaan. You've all been very industrious, Q announced, surveying the room with the satisfaction of a man checking in on an experiment progressing nicely. Chips removed from 600 clones. A senator quietly building alliances he hasn't told the chancellor about. And two young people having entirely too many feelings near a reflecting pool. Charming. But I think it's time we discuss the matter of permanence. Bill set down his datapad. Permanence. This fleet, Q said, gesturing broadly at the ceiling, toward the ships holding silent orbit above them, is not going home. Not to Wolf 359, not to the Federation, not to any point of origin your officers remember serving. I've made certain of that. The passage that brought them here doesn't reopen, doesn't reverse, and won't respond to any technology your Federation or this galaxy possesses. However clever. He looked directly at Data, who had joined the briefing via the room's holoprojector. Expression as composed as ever despite the magnitude of what Q had just confirmed. I imagine you'd already calculated as much, Captain. I had, Data said, Sensor telemetry, from the moment of our arrival indicated. No residual spatial anomaly. Consistent with a reversible transit method. I chose not to raise the matter until I had exhausted alternative theories. I have now exhausted them. Then you understand. The shape of things. Hues. Tone sharpened into something. Closer to formal declaration. This fleet, and everyone aboard it, remains in this galaxy permanently, under a jurisdiction answerable to exactly two authorities, myself and Senator Bail Organa, not the Jedi Council, not the Galactic Senate, not the Chancellor, whatever title he currently enjoys before he claims a considerably worse one. I didn't rescue 2,000 souls from an unmarked grave at Wolf 359 to hand them over to yet another galactic bureaucracy that will get half of them killed through committee. The room absorbed this in silence. General Rel, standing near the tactical display, found his voice first. You're proposing an independent power block. 12 capital ships worth of unknown technology. Answerable to nobody but a senator and, with respect, whatever you actually are. I'm not proposing it, Hugh said. I'm informing you it already exists. The proposal stage concluded roughly 4 days ago, when I decided a galaxy this thoroughly, rigged against itself needed a variable nobody currently controls. He turned to Bale, and something almost sober crossed his features. You didn't ask for this, Senator. I'm aware of that. But you're the only person in this galaxy. I trust not to either weaponize this fleet for personal ambition or hand it over, out of misplaced faith, to institutions that have already failed everyone in this room at least once. That's not flattery. It's simply the most accurate assessment I could make. Bale was quiet for a long moment, weighing a decision that would define the rest of his life against a war he now understood far better than any senator alive. And the wider galaxy. The Republic. The Separatists. Sidious himself. What happens when they learn a fleet like this exists? Answerable to no government they can pressure or infiltrate. Panic, mostly, Hughes said, with the faint relish of a man anticipating a favorite part of the show. The trade federations. Already sent 3 increasingly hysterical diplomatic inquiries, which I've been quietly redirecting into a satisfying bureaucratic void. Count Dooku will hear rumors within the week and assume, incorrectly, that it's a Republic superweapon. The Jedi Council will sense something in the Force they can't explain and disagree, predictably, about what to do regarding it. And Sidious. Hugh's expression cooled several degrees. Sidious will understand exactly what it means faster than anyone else in this galaxy, because he alone knows precisely how many of his carefully arranged pieces this fleet has already knocked off the board. He will move to eliminate it. That's not a warning, Senator. That's simply the schedule you should plan around. Data's holographic image inclined its head slightly. Then I recommend we use the time we have wisely. Fleet defensive posture. Integration of clone volunteers, who've elected to remain with us. Following chip removal. And continued diplomatic groundwork with Alderaan's leadership. Before hostile attention arrives in force. A sensible recommendation, Captain, Hughes said, which is precisely why I'm not going to interfere with how you execute it. I've done my part. I moved the pieces onto the board. What you all build from here is entirely your own doing. He looked once more around the room. At Bale, at Data's projected image, at the quiet resolve settling over every face present, and something in his expression, for just a moment, lost its habitual mockery entirely. For what it's worth, I don't often bother interfering in a single galaxy's fate twice. Don't waste what you've been given proving me a fool for the exception. He vanished as suddenly as he'd arrived, leaving behind a war room full of people beginning, in earnest, to reckon with the true weight of the war now bearing down on them, and the strange, fragile hope that this time, armed with foreknowledge no one in this galaxy's history had ever possessed, they might actually change how it ended. 2 weeks after the fleet's arrival, Alderaan's capital had begun, quietly and irreversibly, to change shape around the presence of ships that would never leave its skies again. Bail Organa stood on the same terrace where he'd first met Leia, watching dawn break gold across the mountains, and found himself thinking less like a senator negotiating a temporary crisis and more like a man architecting the permanent defense of everything he loved. Beside him, Breha had finally been brought fully into the truth of it all, the daughter she would one day raise, the war reshaping itself around her husband's new and impossible allies. The weight of a foreknowledge neither of them had asked to carry. She'd taken it, Bale reflected, with considerably more grace than he had. Aboard the Melbourne, Data had spent the fortnight doing what he did best, building order out of impossible circumstances. 600 de-chipped clone troopers had become 900, then 1,200, as word spread quietly through. Republic ranks stationed near Alderaan and volunteers found their way, one careful defection at a time, into a fleet that offered them something the Republic never had: the truth about what had been done to them, and a genuine choice about what came next. Monroe had built a defensive posture around the 12 ships that any separatist fleet would think twice about testing. Cito had spent long hours in engineering, reverse-adapting Federation technology to interface, where possible, with Republic and even captured separatist systems, building bridges between two galaxies, worth of engineering philosophy that had never been meant to meet. Luke had not yet gone to find his father. Neither had Leia gone to find her mother. Both understood, with the hard one, patience of people who had already lived one version of that reunion and lost everything in its aftermath. That timing mattered as much as courage, that showing up too soon, too raw, too certain of a future Anakin Skywalker hadn't lived yet, risked becoming exactly the kind of interference Ahsoka had warned against. They would go, not yet, but soon, and on their own terms, carrying love instead of certainty, choices instead of a script already written. Ahsoka. Tano had taken to walking the Melbourne's corridors in the early ship's hours, when the halls were quiet enough to think, turning over the same question that had followed her since. She'd woken in a body she'd thought she'd never wear again, not whether Anakin could be saved, but whether saving him required something none of them had tried the first time, simply choosing, openly and without shame, to love him exactly as he was, long before anyone gave him a reason to believe he had to hide it. Far across the galaxy, in a Coruscant office draped in the trappings of democratic authority, a chancellor who called himself Palpatine received, for the third time that week, an intelligence report he could not fully explain: an unregistered fleet, unprecedented technology. A senator from Alderaan suddenly and inexplicably difficult to read. He set the report aside with the same patient calm that had carried him through 3 decades of careful manipulation, and told himself, as he had told himself through every crisis before this one, that all variables could eventually be managed. He did not yet know that this particular variable had already begun, removing the leash he'd spent decades sewing into 2 million loyal skulls. He did not yet know that a fleet under Q's authority had no interest in being managed at all. Above Alderaan, as the sun rose fully over a capital that had quietly, irrevocably become the second front of a war that hadn't been fought this way before, Bail Organa allowed himself, for the first time since a stranger in white had appeared uninvited in his home, a single moment of something close to hope, fragile, unearned, and entirely worth defending. Against all odds, a fleet meant for a graveyard had become a galaxy's last unwritten chapter. But in the shadows of Coruscant, a Sith Lord was already beginning, patiently, to search for the thread that would let him pull it all apart. The Force would remember who reached for it first.